Well, if you're watching on video stream, well, I'm going to do the whole formal intro thing later on a little bit, but usually I jump into the show. Obviously, if Justin's here, you know that, but I always feel kind of weird whenever there's a guest not introing them at first and just being like, "Oh, hey, by the way, like Justin's not here." But so if you're watching on the video, you already know this, but we do have a guest this week, Mr. Andy Jordan. Follow him on Twitter at Andy's Magic Minute. You have heard him here multiple times before. Of course, already repping Orlando. You know what it is. Got the clean Penny Hardaway jersey on. We're going to talk plenty of Magic later on in the episode. But since it's August 26th as of recording this episode, and we are especially post-Olympics in the doldrums of the NBA, if you will, we're going to go a little off script because Andy is as big of a Star Wars fan as I am. And so we're going to have a rare, for the first time in a while, non-hoops Driving Dish NBA podcast intro. And the big reason I want to talk about it now is because the Acolyte just got canceled. The news from, I think it was Deadline broke it first, but it came down this week. I saw somebody tweet, I think it was Culture Crave, that the Acolyte costs like $638,000 for every minute that they actually
it was like a budget of $180 million.
Yeah. They put a lot into those 8 episodes. And I'm going to ask you two questions. Number one, I guess, where were you at on Acolyte overall? Because I think we both can say this isn't necessarily surprising, but do you think they did enough towards the end to get season 2? And are you concerned about the direction of the franchise right now? Because that's kind of where, I feel like we're at a kind of a turning point almost. There's good things that are going on, but they're all kind of coming to an end soon.
Yeah, I think I'll start off with the Acolyte. So my thoughts on the Acolyte was I was really excited when I heard the premise. I said, great, fresh start, 100 years before anything happens, no tie-ins to any existing stuff. You guys really have an open slate in this immense world, this galaxy, and create a great story. And then they jacked it up by contradicting some things that were already in canon. We won't go into all that stuff, but you can go to Twitter or YouTube. There is hundreds and hundreds of articles and feeds and memes making fun of it because they were contradicting established canon, which, if you remember, that's a lot of what Ryan Johnson got grilled on when he took over and did not the Last Jedi.
Yeah, The Last Jedi.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the same thing. He basically, J.J. Abrams set him up, and he just contradicting things within the first 10 seconds. Like, that's what he got ripped for a lot. It's just you went against what was already being established in a story. You want to do your own thing, great. But when someone's setting you up, you really have to carry that on. And I felt with the Acolyte, they did a really bad job about that. They did a bad job about storytelling. I mean, I knew who the bad guy was in the first episode. Like, yep, easy as can be. And it wasn't like they were trying to hide it. So what was the big reveal? Like Soul's thing? Like, for those who haven't watched it, I'll try not to do any kind of spoilers. But I think they did a really bad job in storytelling. I think ultimately that really is what hurt you. Star Wars is a gold mine. Like, you don't even have to nail it to be successful. You have to be really bad to mess up in Star Wars. And I felt the Acolyte did that in a lot of ways. I won't get into the whole messaging thing and the political. I don't care about it. I'm talking about just simple storytelling, right? 1 second, this person is good, ready to turn the cells in. Literally 5 minutes later, she's going against that. And that's just bad storytelling. That has nothing to do with any of the other things people are talking about. I think ultimately that's really what hurt the Acolyte. Just bad storytelling. And I don't know if they did enough at the end. I think there was already so much damage that even with the little hints of like, oh, where's this going next? And we all would like to see eventually like what happens. But I think the masses are like, yeah, I'm good. I'm not as into it. I'm sorry. It's just not going to work for me. I didn't attach myself to the characters.
Yeah, and that was my biggest thing. I think that last thing you just said, where I really struggled to attach myself and just care about the main characters. Like, anything I cared about was happening on the side. And you're right. I mean, it took basically 7 of the 8 episodes to get to, because they kept building it up. It was going to be the big Soul reveal. And that was going to be, what happened back in the day. What is his tie to Osha and May? And it was okay, but it just didn't feel like it needed to take 7 episodes to build to that point. They did a few things well at the end. The one thing that I will look back at the Acolyte and say, yo, they smoked that were the fight scenes. The fight
Yes,
in the
100%.
unbelievable. I mean, some of the best choreographed lightsaber fighting that we have ever seen in Star Wars. Like, I think that 5th episode where they just fight the whole time. I don't want to call him Darth. I don't want to call him Darth Jason, but they keep calling him that because of his role in The Good Place, obviously.
What's the other one that Smilo Ren?
Yeah, Smilo
I
Ren.
love that one. That was a good one. Smilo Ren.
But like
those
that
fight scenes were amazing.
instant classic.
Incorporating the what's it called? The metal.
Yeah, the cortosis.
Yes, that's what it was. I was drawing a blank in the name. That was amazing. I mean, just those fight scenes were great. There were good moments in the Acolyte. There were great cinematography moments, right? When you see the certain cutscenes, like there's a lot of good, right? We're focusing on all the things that are ugly, but there's a lot of good in the show. Because ultimately, you didn't get attached to the client, to the characters. You didn't have a good storytelling. Like you build it up, and you go, really? Like that's it? That's so dumb. Like that is the dumbest thing I've seen. None of this needed to happen. It was very easy. You could have just, sorry, this person started turning into smoke. So we went after them, and turns out like you didn't have to do the whole cover. It was, and then
it's little things too. It's wasting Kelnaka and not having a Wookiee Jedi fight, which is like one of the big things that everybody's gassed about.
It wasn't great.
The real one, like the dramatic fight scene that you would expect, and that's extra shame. Like we said, when we talk about how good the quality of these fight scenes were. I mean, what it all comes back to is what you mentioned at the beginning: is that I guess I'm most disappointed. You're right, because they had such an open slate. Like we've been so tied to the Skywalker timeline and all the trilogies. And I love all the stuff, and we'll talk about that in a little bit with like Andor and the Mandalorian and Ahsoka, Rebels, the cartoons. Like all those things have done such a great job at filling in that timeline, and I appreciate them. But you're right, like they haven't, and they have such. With even going back to the Legends, with the stuff that with the new trilogy isn't canon anymore, like you have a wealth of already pre-written good stories, just like readapt them, make minor tweaks, and it's almost like idiot proof. And so that's where it's just disappointing, because I think too, the reality is, and what I'm concerned about is what, does this prevent them from taking the risks on the timeline, or, going forward? Does this go it back where it's like, look, you've got Andor season 2 coming out, which is great. Love Andor season 1.
Andor was well done.
Yeah, everybody was really high on it. I think everybody is high on Rogue One as well. But look, we know it's a 2-season show. Like when it comes back, that's it. There is no more here. We know how his story is going to end. Mandalorian and Grogu, when that goes to theaters, of course, super excited about that. That's been, I mean, post.
Is it confirmed that it's going to be tied to Ahsoka?
I think so, because I feel like it has to.
I will hope so, because I actually enjoyed Ahsoka. I thought I loved Rebels too. Like I was a huge Rebels guy, so I loved the Ahsoka storyline. So I'm hoping to see that conclude, whether it's in the movie, standalone movie, or another season. But I really want to see that story line develop.
Well, so that's why I have faith, because A, Thrawn is such a good villain, and B, just because, I mean, Ahsoka season 2 is already greenlit. And if the people can't tell, now 9 minutes into this podcast, you and I are deep in the trenches with Star Wars. Like, you're right. Ahsoka, if you're a casual and you're just picking that up, I can get why it may be only okay to you. If you've watched Rebels and Clone Wars and all the things that have built up to this, like it is everything and then some. It's ultimate fan service right now. And so, yeah, I'm with you. Like, I couldn't be more excited about that going forward. If you haven't watched Clone Wars, Rebels, and Bad Batch, I do highly recommend all those.
Bad Batch was another good one. I was surprised. I wasn't really gung-ho about it at first. When it first came out, it just seemed like, But I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a good storyline. It developed things. Again, storyline. It's storytelling. Yep. Like, that's all it is. Like, keep me entertained. And unfortunately, again, the Acolyte just kind of fell flat on that. And it's a shame, because it had the premise to be really stinking good. That scene was awesome. I was like, oh my God, here we go. This show's going to rock. Kind of went downhill after that until the next fight scene. And it's disappointing, because again, there was such high expectations. Like you said, clean slate. give me something new, this immense galaxy. You can do whatever. And they fell short.
Well, now you're
And
basically
wasted $180 million.
yeah, they have a whole lot of money. I'm trying to think of like quick whose contract that would equate to right away. I feel like that's like a Emmanuel Quickly contract or something like that. But no, I think the other thing, I guess where I'm hoping now is it's like the next project that's coming out technically is Skeleton Crew, which I feel like no one is talking about, but maybe that's one of those things where it surprises me because we all have no expectations here. Like we go into it because you're right. In the past, like I think with Solo, for example, the movie, I think that discouraged them. And I'm a Solo defender. I actually like that movie,
Yeah.
but I think that discouraged them from taking more chances like that, where they go with non-Jedi stories. And like, I'm just hoping Acolytes just being and getting canceled doesn't give them
You
that.
have the Old Republic. I
Yeah,
mean,
the
you
whole
have Revan.
thing.
He's probably the best
Yeah,
stinking character in all of Star Wars that most people don't know about.
you
You
could.
can do a 10-season series on him alone, and it would be epic. Like
Yeah,
the story is already there. Just put it
it's
in film,
it's
put
there.
it in video.
Knights of the Old Republic, the game alone, just the first one. I'm not even talking all the lead up stuff you could do, like
Mm.
with his origins. I'm not even talking the second game, which you could do the whole exile storyline as well. You're right. You could get just off that gameplay, you could get 4 or 5 seasons and it not be washed, it flow well. And then you're right. You make it that 10-story arc. Like they have, it kind of goes back to what we're saying. Like they have the storylines out there. You're right. I just hope it doesn't discourage them. Like that's my biggest thing is I don't want them to stop
I
taking
think
risks because I do
this
think
is
they need.
something that Martin, the guy from Game of Thrones, I forgot what's his initials.
George R. R. Martin.
George R. R. Martin. He made a comment about everybody wants to put their own spin on something. Like they have a storyline, but no, we want to change this up. I want to deliver this message. And I think that's probably what hurts me. You have these storylines already built. They're already great. You know the public likes them. Why are you messing with it? Right? Why are you trying to get cute with it?
Yeah.
It's there. From the dialogue to the story arcs to like everything is set. Just do your thing. Put it on film, put it on video, make it look great, make it epic. Don't mess with the storyline. Like don't change it. And I'm not saying you writers can't do that. Of course you can, but then develop your own. Don't grab something that's already been established and then just put a character on it to make it yours. Like that wasn't your story. You just messed somebody else's up. I think that part is the part that kind of irks me a little bit. So you have the material, just use it.
Yeah. Hopefully with Ahsoka, they do with the Thrawn trilogy. Like that's what I'm still hopeful towards. Like they've already made certain changes just to the story that have happened through Rebels and such that it won't be exactly perfect, but they more or less have the outline for it.
Right.
Like it's right there. You take the skeleton of that story, you adapt it to, the Mandalorian movie, or you just adapt it to season 2. And it's like the foundation is right there. I don't know. I'm hopeful. Like I said, I am. They have the Rey movie scheduled as well to eventually come out here. I'm hopeful. Like I'm a huge Star Wars fan. Like they've had
where that one goes. Like I'll be honest, I have no clue what they're gonna do with that one.
I like the characters. Like the new trilogy, I liked the core of the characters. You're right. They tried to. They made the movie. They set it up. They went the other way with it. And then when they went the other way with it, they overcorrected the other way. And so it just ended up being kind of a mess. That's my biggest beef with that trilogy at the end of the day is I just don't feel like any of the characters got done any justice, like of the core 3. Like I just felt disappointed.
I didn't like the fact that they changed directors. Like you should have just, if you really like Rian Johnson, you should have just given Rian Johnson all 3.
I agree. Because
JJ, give JJ all 3. Look, I like films from Rian Johnson.
Yeah.
Like Looper's awesome. Like there are things that Rian Johnson has done that are fantastic. I think the failure here was, again, someone set up a story and you just decided, I don't want to do that. That's not really, unfortunately, that's not really fair. It's already been set up for you. And you needed to understand that when you took over this role, I have to kind of pick up where this one left off and not just veer right, which is exactly what he did. And that's what made it not click. It wasn't that it wasn't necessarily that it was a bad movie. It just was a bad follow-up to what was already established. You have to kind of continue that. It's like if you're writing a book and your first chapter is a vampire novel, and then I get it and I turn it into like the Smurfs. Maybe your story was good and my story was good, but it didn't mesh. Like it just didn't make sense. And I that's what I feel happened with Rian Johnson's movie. They should have just kept the same director throughout the three. Give Rian Johnson, like I think it was rumored he was going to get like a trilogy, like a in the Old Republic. That would
Yeah.
have been great. Let him do
Yeah.
whatever he wants. But they messed that up.
Yeah.
Disney has messed up a lot.
It would have been, yeah, it's been real. It's been a mixed bag. Like they've had some unquestionable successes, stuff that I'm definitely happy about. They've had some other stuff that has been very, and so I guess that's where kind of, I think we're all waiting to see what it looks like going forward. But I promise we are going to talk some basketball here on the Drive and Dish NBA podcast. I'm Kevin Rafuse. Justin Cousart off for the week. He'll be back next episode. Andy Jordan, again, at Andy's Magic Minute on Twitter. Follow him there. Is filling in for the week. We got a bunch of stuff to talk about. We're going to talk about a few of the free agents that are still lingering out there, the bigger names, the Zach LaVines, Brandon Ingrams, Trae Youngs of the world, kind of where we think they're going to end up if they get moved at all. We're going to talk a few random things as well. Of course, get into some Magic. Eric Spoelstra rumored to take over for Steve Kerr for Team USA. So stay tuned for that. Leave us a review on iTunes, good or bad, wherever you get your podcasts. We will, or geez, oh man, I've done this intro so many times. I'm going to mess it up on the live one without Justin. Maybe I need him after all to anchor me in these intros. Anyway, leave us a review on iTunes, good or bad. We'll read them on the podcast is what I'm trying to say. If you're not an Apple user, wherever you get your podcasts, you can find us. And what Justin says, where I think I'm trying to read ahead, is that you can watch the show on YouTube. Just search the Drive and Dish NBA podcast. And now a word from our sponsors. All right, so coming back, again, most of free agency is done. We're kind of at that dull point now in the calendar where we're going to have training camps coming back here sooner than later. The deck chairs have all been moved around, if you will. Most teams have made their big moves, but there are still a few names that are out there that were rumored, namely the three that we're going to talk about here in particular are Zach LaVine in Chicago, Brandon Ingram in New Orleans, and Trae Young down in Atlanta. And so I guess I'm going to start with Zach LaVine because he's the one who's just been the most actively shopped. It was no secret about the Bulls trying to move him. It went from them trying to get, the big haul for, these star premium players to we may have to attach a first rounder to Zach LaVine to be able to move off that contract. But, some big changes in Chicago. Of course, DeMar DeRozan is out. It seems like they finally are blowing that team up. I guess
2 seasons too late.
Yeah, it's of course 2 seasons. I mean, once Lonzo went down, that was realistically it with this core. And that's obviously way out of their hands. Extremely unfortunate. Yep. We hope that he'll be able to play ball one day. But I mean, Andy, where are you at with Zach LaVine? Do you think that there will be a team that eventually bites as we get into the season? One of those teams that are kind of on the mid right now, take more swing. Because Zach LaVine is objectively good. It's just that contract.
Here's my issue with Zach LaVine. And I'll be honest, I feel Zach LaVine and Trae Young are very similar when it comes to this. Bad contract, in my opinion, when it comes to, I'm speaking specifically about Zach LaVine. It's a bad contract. Yes, he puts up numbers. And I know some people who are going to be watching this who follow me on Twitter are going to hate these words. Empty stats. What do I mean by that? It doesn't mean that you're not talented, right? For you to put up the amount of points, efficiency that he does, right? Yes, there's a lot of talent there. There is a long list of star talented NBA players who simply just don't win, right? Marbury. I loved Marbury growing up. Every team he left got better. He was an all-star, but every team he left magically just became better, right? Even though he was putting up amazing stats, even though he was an all-star, right? He just, for whatever reason, it just didn't work out. You couldn't win with him, not as your number one guy, not as the star. Abdul Rahim, great player, put up amazing stats. Everywhere he went, as soon as he left, that team got better. Rudy Gay to a degree. put up great stats. You don't win with them. And I think Zach LaVine, and I'm a Trae Young hater, I guess. I believe the same thing on Trae Young. They don't win as the number one guy, right? And with Zach, that contract is bad. A team is not going to give up the assets that it takes, right? This isn't like baseball where you can like eat some of the contract. It doesn't work that way. You got to money, especially with the new, the CBA and all the changes. So I just don't think there's a market for him, right? No one's going to give up a lot. Maybe in his last year, I think a lot of people are learning from the Bradley Beal deal last year. Not
Yeah.
a good idea, right? I think that hurt Chicago more than anything. People saw Phoenix and go, oof, look what they did for Bradley Beal. I'm not going to be that guy. I'm sorry. I won't be that GM. And people
Yeah.
are becoming more conservative when it comes to the trade market. So I think with Zach, I just don't think there's a trade market for him.
Yeah, I'm going to push back on your Sharif Abdur-Rahim comment just because that's my guy. And I think he was a little more like a borderline all-star. I mean, I don't know if they were ever billing him to be a one necessarily, but like, yeah, he definitely wasn't playing on great teams.
He was a
Marbury,
2010 guy. I mean, he was a great individual player.
He was good in
again,
Atlanta.
Yeah, like these are not negatives against these players. These are talented all-star level players. But there is a difference between that and you being the guy on the team that leads me to victories. And I think that's the difference with this. Doesn't mean, again, it's not a negative to the player, but there's a difference between winning and putting up highlights.
Yeah. I mean, he's got 3 years left on the deal. He's due $49 million in the last year of the deal in 26, 27. It's a player option. So you would imagine he's going to take it unless he boosts his value. I mean, you're right. It is one of those things where it's like, he played in Minnesota, but he's largely, I mean, the majority of his career is spent in Chicago at this point. And like, look, the reality is that Chicago just hasn't played much competitive basketball in the last, 10 years or so. And so I guess maybe that would be if you're the optimist where I go, hey, I'm going to take the swing right now because I'm going to get LaVine out of maybe what we consider that's been a less serious franchise here the last few years. You go, hey, he's 28 years old. We got 3 years on this contract. It's not like it's a 5-year anchor that's necessarily going to cripple us. It is in theory for his prime. The other big reality with this too is like, forget the money. The money just looks only worse because it's all the injury risk. Like we go back to 2018, he played 63 games in 2018. He played 60 in 2019, 58, 67. He did play 77 in 22-23, but he only played 25 last year. Like there is a long noted injury history as well with Zach LaVine. I hate being this chalky about it because we even whined about him on the last episode and the amount of national TV games they were on. If I'm the Lakers, do you talk yourself into a swing at Zach LaVine and you go, you know what? Let's take a shot at this.
The Lakers.
I don't know. Like you have picks down the road, a few first rounders, and then you try to attach like a Hachimura to it or something like that. Somebody that's still as young and has a little bit of upside. I don't think Chicago is expecting much. You know what I mean? I don't think
you would need to give up him. You would need to give up picks. You will probably need to give up. I mean, I don't think they care about giving up Hood, like a good young prospect.
Maybe even D'Lo to match salary. I mean, if you have to move D'Lo, so be it. I don't think that's the end of the world for the Lakers. I think a lot of Lakers fans would honestly be kind of thrilled with that.
Are you better with LaVine than you are with D'Lo? I will argue you're better with D'Lo, right?
I don't know if I'm that far. I do think LaVine in a vacuum is better than D'Lo, but if I'm looking at what I'm giving up as a whole to get LaVine,
and that's my point. That's my point. Like, for what you're gonna have to give up to get him ultimately leaves a void somewhere. If it's a 1-to-1, you're right. I think LaVine is a better player than D'Lo, but it's not going to be a 1-to-1. It is D'Lo and then some to get LaVine, and at that point, are you better?
I guess my question is just because I don't think this Lakers team is winning anything right now. So that's almost where I'm kind of like, do you take this thing just to shake it up? But do they after last year? Like the way they went out to Denver the past few seasons, even last year in the first round, like, look, you have one of the best duos in the NBA. Like that's why you're always never going to totally write this team off. Like they employ LeBron James. But when I look around the Western Conference, I mean, you got Denver who's better. You got Minnesota who's better. You've got OKC, who's better. You got the Clippers with Kawhi. I still probably lean their way. Phoenix is definitely better. I think you can make a pretty good argument that Sacramento's better. Dallas just went to the finals last year. Memphis with a healthy job, probably better. Is New Orleans better? Like, I'm not going to give them that, but
I think people are sleeping on Memphis. Memphis was dismantled by injuries last year.
Yeah.
Memphis has a good squad.
And John
they got some good young players.
That's the thing. You got motivated. He keeps it like strictly basketball and he looks to prove everybody wrong and be back to this face of the NBA type deal. Like, yeah, I still think the sky is the limit for Memphis. Like, they have, like you said, ravaged by injuries last year. Desmond Bane is still a young player who I'm really high on. So,
GJ Jackson, man, that boy, that's a bad man right there.
Yeah,
he's good and he's young. I mean, I like that Memphis team a lot. Look, I think San Antonio is going to be a lot better than they were last year. I think they made some smart moves. Don't underestimate Chris Paul.
No, Chris Paul is a great pickup for them. I mean, all last season I watched San Antonio be the most inept team at throwing entry passes I think I've ever seen in NBA history. Like,
now it's to their benefit to be bad and get another run at Cooper.
Yeah,
but can you imagine
if San Antonio, again, after getting Wemby, like, it's already ridiculous that San Antonio's 3 number 1 picks have been David Robinson, Tim Duncan, and
Wemby.
Like, if they got Cooper Flag as well, like, I'm finding a different sport, man. Like, San Antonio, you already got the alien. You're not getting Cooper Flag too.
Yep. No, I mean, the West is stacked. Look, I think both conferences are a lot more balanced out than what we have been in years past.
Yes.
Both West and East. You got teams that just, for a fact, are not going anywhere. Detroit, I'm looking at you. But then you have, for the most part, there's, Magic can end up being a top 4 seed. They could end up being an 8 seed. Like, it really is a small window of gap, right? It's going to be in a lot of factors. Health, chemistry, like, just a lot of little things. But yeah, I going back to the LaVine thing, I don't see a team putting together a package of what it takes to make a move to LaVine. It's going to take a lot. That 48, 47 mil, that's a lot of pieces that you need to put together for the math to work. And when you do that, are you better? And I think ultimately the answer for a lot of teams is going to be like, no,
not now.
You're not better now.
And I think he'll get, again, as this contract moves on, like, even as soon as next year, like, that becomes infinitely more movable.
The cap goes up, it becomes a little more easier to eat that contract.
Like,
right? We're expecting the cap to go up.
Yes, Tatum's making $70 million in a few years. Like, it is going to rise, and that will help out. But you're right. I do think they're kind of. I mean, they've been stuck for the whole season. They were saying they didn't even have a market. Like, that's kind of. Yep. And again, I like Zach LaVine as a player. I think I'm probably a little higher on Zach LaVine than you are, but you're right, not with that contract. For Trae Young, I just kind of think Atlanta made their move already, like, by moving to DeJounte Murray. Like, it feels like they're going to try to run this one more time. Like, if they were going to blow it up, it feels like they should have blown it up and were just going through this past offseason. But then they got the number 1 overall pick. You moved to DeJounte Murray. Like, it just
one of the worst drafts ever, but okay.
Yeah, I know. It really is. Like, first number 1 overall pick. We just talked about San Antonio a second ago. Like, here's the first number 1 pick in Atlanta, and it's the worst draft that we've been talking about being historically bad for, I feel like, the last year and a half now. But I mean, it's also different with Trae Young because, look, they did. Just going to that conference finals buys you a lot more goodwill than Zach LaVine and Brandon Ingram have at this point. Like, there is, a little bit of him playing meaningful basketball, but you're right. I think the problem with that team is they plateaued. They've never even been close since. It's not even they won playoffs.
I think that conference finals thing was a fluke. I said it that year. You can go back to every single call I've made, every podcast. I called it a fluke from day one.
Well, because I'm the wrong
team, and that was it. But that team was not all that.
I'm the wrong person to say it because I'm going to sound like a super homer, but the Sixers blew it that year. Like, that's what happened. The Sixers just blew it. They absolutely choked between games 5 and game 7. Like, we all know the narrative. That's what's
Atlanta was hot, but that's what it was. The team itself,
the Sixers
wasn't an outstanding team, and everyone was picking them. No, I sure as heck didn't. Atlanta has done nothing but made moves to try to help out Trae.
Yeah.
This is where my comment came in about Trae and LaVine being similar players. All-star level, all-star talent. I am not denying how great of an individual player Trae Young is. Do I think he's personally overrated? 100%. I think he's overrated. But it doesn't change the fact that he puts up great numbers. He does a lot of things on the court, in the half court. He creates for his teammates. But he has good players around him, and he can't do anything. So at some point, you got to look in the mirror and understand, where's the issue? Because Murray, I thought, was a great compliment to him. Didn't work out. You wanted shooters, you got him Bogdanovich. Hasn't worked out. Give him big centers who can do. Hasn't worked out. Thank God he has Jalen Johnson, who, by the way, is an absolute stud. And if I was Atlanta, I am desperately looking to cash in on Trae and start building around Jalen, start building around. I like Dyson Daniels a lot. I think he's a very talented player. They have some good pieces there. I would try to cash in on Trae because, unlike Zach LaVine, I think Trae still has a lot of value, and someone's going to give up a lot for him.
Yeah.
Unlike Zach.
That's the key. I think Trae Young is going to get a lot. Like, I still think you get multiple first-round picks because, look, we know what it is with Trae Young at this point. Like, I do think he's a next-level gifted offensive player. Like, I do think he's kind of an offense in a vacuum by himself, but he just gives everything back on defense. And, like, the problem is it's not even like, oh, you can just, up his effort or, increase his motor or something like that, like coach a better defense. That's just the limitation with him being a smaller guard. Like, that's kind of, when Becky Hammond had her infamous, like, you can't win with a small guard rant. That's a lot of what she was talking about right there. I think we just talked about him a second ago, honestly. Like, know who should take the swing on Trae Young if they're going to take it? San Antonio, when you've got Wemby cleaning up all that defense and just like, you can kind of cover for a lot of what Trae doesn't do, but then you give them a gifted point guard like that who is going to facilitate, but then be able to stretch the floor for you. Like that, there are certain scenarios where I'm way higher on Trae Young's fit, but you're right. I kind of think if it doesn't work this year, it's starting to run its course in Atlanta. Like, we kind of got to see what it is now.
The question, and obviously I have no insider information, right? But the question on that's going to be, can Trae accept not being the guy? Ultimately, that's what's going to make him successful, because I do think there's a lot of talent there. But if he goes to a place like San Antonio, for a fact you are not the dude. Can you accept that?
Yeah.
I don't know him. I'm not in the locker room, right? I have no clue if he's willing to do that or not. In Atlanta, he's had to be that, right? So he has no other choice. But I don't know if he's willing to accept that. And I think that's what ultimately is going to define his success from a team perspective, because he's got the talent. Can he go to a team and say, no, I'm going to be your Robin, or I'm going to be the third dude, because you two right there are going to be a studs. I'm going to worry about distributing, breaking down the defenses, and try to get in a three here or there. Not shoot up 28 footers all the time. He's an elite shooter that shoots career 35%. That's not elite, for the record, people. Just because you make a 30-footer does not make you an elite shooter, right? So, and again, career, not season. I know he had like a good season last year. I do think Trae has value. If I'm Atlanta, I do look to trade him, because you're not going anywhere. That Atlanta team right now is not going to win in the East. It's not. You're not a top 4 team. You're not close to that. So why continue to hold on to Trae Young? Flip him. Do not do the mistake that Chicago did. Do not do the mistake that Portland did. Do not do the mistake that the Wizards did. Don't hold on to this guy forever and ever and ever. Have the fortitude, for lack of a better term, to flip it and say, all right, we're going to start over, and then we're going to build a team correctly the way we think, kind of like someone else did a couple of years ago, and look where they are now, right?
Yeah.
They had some good players on numbers. They knew we're not going to get to that level. We're going to be mediocre at best.
Yeah.
Blow it up.
I think the counterpoint is that, or what Atlanta is going to try to argue, is that Trae Young is still 25 years old. Like, there's a lot more. There is a timeline where you don't have to fully blow it up, and you can kind of do a mini retool, and maybe that's what they're trying to do now. But I mean, I think you're also right. Like, you can restock the war chest. do it right. Like you said, you have multiple young players there, especially Jalen Johnson, like you mentioned, who you're pretty excited about going forward. Obviously, assuming Rishier pans out again. I know it's a week number one, but either way, if he pans out to the way that a one pick may be, like it may not even be that long of a rebuild, and you're going to get multiple picks for Trae. The other team that I think makes sense is somebody that took the swing on Dame last year and it didn't work out. But I think Miami makes a lot of sense, and they have the pieces to do it. Like you bring in Trae Young to have him play alongside Jimmy and play alongside Bam. And I think the reason I'm high on it, like I am with San Antonio, is I trust their coaches too. Like I trust Pop to convince Trae Young to buy in and fit. I trust Spo to be able to fit anybody in the NBA. Like
Miami's a mafia.
Yeah,
they are. I don't like appreciating them because obviously as a Magic fan, that's like against my DNA.
Right.
Man, do they run a great organization. Like they are on point with everything that they do, from like scouting to practices to like they're just so on point with everything. And the proof is in the pudding. They are constantly up there, and you constantly look at the roster and you go, how?
Yeah. I mean,
right? It's the organization and that amazing coach, which is a great segue. But yeah, like that. Yes, if any team can help, it would be them. But not everybody who goes to these places works out, because it does take the individual to be willing to be molded. And I don't think the patience in those organizations is high. You're not going to do what we ask you to do? Thank you. Have a great day. We'll trade you. Pat Riley don't play.
No, I don't think he does either, and I don't think they do. But I think that culture that you talked about is a big reason. Like, I hate saying that, being corny and being like, "Oh, heat culture," but I do. In this case, I kind of trust them to get Trae to buy in. These guys have just all won before, and even for the naysayers who want to just go, "Oh, well, Jimmy and Bam have been to the finals, they haven't won." It's just like, look, come on, like the organization has had a pretty solid track record. I mean, really, post 2000, you could make a pretty good case that Miami is at worst a top 5 franchise, and like probably a lot closer to top 3. I mean, 3 titles.
They are consistently good to great. Consistently, right?
Yeah.
Ever since for like last 20 plus years, just consistent. You know that they're going to be up there at the end of the year. They start off slow. You see them, they're in 9th place. It doesn't matter. At the end of the year, somehow they're going to be 4th, 5. They're going to make it to the second round. They're going to give somebody fits. That's just who they are, right? Like there are certain organizations. I have a lot of respect for the Indiana organization. Indiana has never officially tanked, ever.
No.
Ever. But my God, they have a great front office. They have great coaching constantly, and they are constantly there for being a small market team. They're not attracting big free agents. They just know what they're doing. They know how to build teams. They know how to build rosters. They know how to build front offices. And they haven't had the success of a Miami, but you've never seen Indiana just be garbage. Like it just doesn't happen with them.
Well, you mentioned it too in Miami, or kind of alluded to it. It's like, look, Miami just also has the reality. Like they're in that franchise where it's like, look, they've got South Beach. Like Miami's going to get a meeting every single time. Like to me, there aren't many other teams that get that guaranteed meeting with every major free agent. Like maybe the Lakers, maybe the Knicks, like in Miami. That's probably it at this point. Like any other guaranteed meeting to me comes around the players. Like it depends on who's there. The Sixers got a meeting with Paul George, for example, because we have Maxey and Embiid. Like, I think if it's just the Sixers, there's no way they get an automatic meeting with Paul George. It'll be the same.
Miami has the front office. You can't really say the same thing about some of the other organizations you mentioned, right? Like,
no, I agree.
They have a great organization that's very highly respected. Every player who's ever played there speaks highly of them. They'll tell you the truth too, right? They tell you the toughness about it, but they credit it for a lot of things. So they have a very good package to offer, unfortunately.
Yeah. No doubt about it. Brandon Ingram, New Orleans, one of the more disappointing exits, if not the most disappointing, honestly, from the playoffs, given how it all went out with their elimination at the Lakers. It kind of, we know all the Zion talks, whether he can stay healthy or not. But it feels like there might be movement on blowing up the Pelicans for the first time. And Brandon Ingram is kind of an interesting case because, I mean, this is obviously a highly touted player, number 2 overall. He's been an all-star, most improved player in the past. He's still just 26 years old. He gave you 20 points a game last year. I don't know. Like, are you worried about, like, what kind of value do you think Ingram has? Because it feels like for all as good as his counting stats are, and he's a big part of the Pelicans winning, it also felt like at times during the playoffs that he almost limited their ceiling as well. Like, it felt like you were hard capped with how far you were going as Brandon Ingram as one of your main guys.
And my problem is I like Ingram. I think he's a really good player. The injury thing is there. He's going to miss 20 plus games every year.
Yeah.
Right. And
yeah.
that always hurts. That always hurts.
Most he played was his rookie year. He played 79 games his rookie year. The most he's played since then is this past season. He played 64. Yeah.
Yep. And that's it. I mean, he's played 50 multiple times, played 45 the year before that, 61, 62. So that's a big concern, right? Especially, again, you're going to invest money. I think the talent is there. I think he's extremely underrated as in all facets. I think he's a really good passer, underrated passer, good scorer from all 3 levels. He's got a good mentality, a good approach about him. There's a lot of good in Ingram. But, I'm not going to contradict myself. For whatever reason, just hasn't worked out when he's your dude. But there's a lot of talent there. I think that a lot of teams could benefit from taking Ingram. The Zion thing has hurt as well. Just they really haven't been able to play together, right? One's injured and one's healthy, and then, vice versa. So I think those things hurt the ceiling of that team. We'll see what happens next year. I think they should give it another run to see how things work. I like the Jordan Hawkins. That was my dude last year. That was a guy that I really liked. Trey Murphy is an absolute stud. God, I would love to see him in a Magic uniform. He is so good. So I think they have a lot of good players on that team. Can they get a full healthy season? Can they get 70 games from both of their studs? If they get 70 games from both of their studs, I think you're going to see the Pelicans really compete and really fight hard in the playoffs and make some noise. It's a tough team.
Yeah. They have to. If they're not going to do it now with these 2 in the West, it's like, look, this is kind of your last shot, in my opinion, with them. And I mean, you're right.
Like the addition of Murray. I mean, Murray, I think that was a big weakness for them last year.
It is.
Was that point guard position. And now you got Murray, who's a really good point guard. I think that also hurt the dynamic with Trey, right? They both kind of need the ball to be at their best. Trey's going to have the ball now in Atlanta, and Deontay's going to have the ball now in New Orleans. I think that's going to benefit both teams a lot.
Yeah. The one pickup for Murray, I think, or the one thing I like about the Murray pickup too, in particular, is, and it's surprising, I guess, with Ingram, or one of the bigger surprises, that New Orleans is just horrible at the end of games last year, and like it got extra exposed in the playoffs. But it's like they just couldn't run a half court offense. DeJounte Murray is the type of player who really comes through in a half court offense late. Like, he is one of those guys who's got a proven track record of, give me the ball, I can get a bucket late. Like, I don't think New Orleans has had that in the past. And so, but you're right though. Like, I think there just has to be a point where you got to win with this group. And you're right with the Ingram.
They need to fill in the hole at center though. They lost what's his name? Their starting center.
Oh, Valanciunas.
So who's going to be their big man? Right, it can't be Zion. Zion's got to be a 4.
No, they need a traditional center. The way that they
picked up Missy in the draft, so that was a good pickup. But I don't think you can rely on him. Right, he was raw. He's just very talented. So I do think they need to try to pick up a center somewhere that can really help them out. And maybe that's where the Ingram thing comes in. Right, maybe you flip Ingram and try to get yourself a quality big. Or, give up a couple of role players to try to get someone. Give up someone like Hawkins, who I think is a great player.
They got Daniel Tice on a flyer as well. Obviously, he's been kind of in and out of the league last few years, but he's fits the role of that traditional center you'd have next to Zion.
You can probably pencil him in as a starter.
Yeah,
he's going to do his thing.
And just with Brandon Ingram's like advanced numbers, I mean, He's never had a positive defensive box plus minus ever in his career. It's slowly improved. Like he had a minus 0.3 last year. That's a career high, but it's just his offense is stagnated. Like, and it shows in his counting stats, but even the box plus minus, like it was a 3.3 in 2020, 2021. It's gone down every year since. It's all the way down to a 1.4 last year. And so you're right. Like I'm hoping Murray opens up the offense for them a little bit. And that's the addition they need to get over the top. I think Brandon Ingram is like Trae Young too, in the sense that like he still has, because he's younger. Like I think there's value there. It's not a LaVine situation where, you know, he's got a big contract for sure. I think that may scare some people off, but I
And the
think
injuries.
he'll bet on the prime a little bit as well. The other injury that people forget about too is the blood clot thing. Like that ended Chris Bosh's career. Thankfully, again, super knock on wood. We haven't had to talk about that with Brandon Ingram, but like that's a scary one too that we'll definitely keep an eye out and that, you know, you hope never rears its head again. All right, let's switch gears. It's time to let you be a homer a little bit. The Orlando Magic.
Yeah.
Obviously, we talked about a much more balanced Eastern Conference this year. I think it's fair to say that the Magic were one of, if not the darlings of the NBA last year in terms of like, look, they've had good young players for a bit now. The core started to come into its own. Guys took the steps they needed to. At the same time, like, look, this Eastern Conference is good. Like between Boston, the defending champs, you've got the Knicks, you've got the Sixers who have Paul George now. You've got other usual suspects as well. Indy in the conference finals last year. Cleveland, who y'all took to 7 last year. Miami, who we talked about, always the sleeping dragon in this conference. But I mean, the big thing is that we know Orlando's just not going to creep up on anybody this year.
No,
like especially after going to make a move like going out and getting Contavious Caldwell-Pope as well. Like it will be the first time these young guys with Banchero and with Suggs and with Franz have a target on their back. So I say all that to say, how do you feel about this group going in now with a little more experience? And I guess what do you like, what's a best case scenario for you and what's an absolute like worst case scenario for you for the Magic this season?
I think a worst case scenario is not getting out of the first round. Because I do think, I don't want to say it's a lock, right? Everything is pairing on injury for any team, right? Any team loses a major player for a significant time, your whole season's out of the drain. So let's not, assuming that is not the case. I do think they're good enough to easily go into the playoffs, one way or the other. Now, do I think they're going to be top 4, like, you know, top 5, like last year? I don't know, right? I think last year we did sneak up on a lot of teams. I think there were some teams that had injuries, like Philly, right? Like Miami, that allowed us to kind of get, you know, a little bit ahead. I'm not focused on that. I'm focused on what's going to happen in the playoffs. And I do think if we don't get out of the first round, I would consider that a disappointment. I think that the team is strong enough to do that. Banchero's just going to get better. Franz is just going to get better. Suggs had a huge improvement last year. I think he's just going to get better. I think adding KCP was a great move for multiple things. Number one, yes, he's a great shooter, and that is something that we desperately needed. But more importantly, playoff experience, championship experience. That is something that this young team does not really have, right? Even last year was the first playoff experience for a lot of those players. Even players who have been in the league for a long time, they really hadn't experienced that before. So now they've done it. They had a great 7-game series. I couldn't be happier with what they went through, right? They went through the grind. They understood the magnitude of it. They understood the importance of regular season games. You get the 4th seed, you have game 7 at home, right? So I think they learned a lot from last year. I think that's a huge win. KCP, I think, is a great addition. Jonathan Isaac playing throughout the year. Yes, we babied him, but it paid off. We ramped him up little by little, right? At the end, he was playing 20 plus minutes a game. You get a full season of that from Jonathan Isaac. This team is at a whole other level. Every time he played, every time he was on the court, there's very few players in this league. And yes, that is full homerism, but I'm sure my stats can back it up. Very little people have the amount of impact that Jonathan Isaac had when he's on the court. So there's a lot of things to be excited about the Magic. I haven't even talked about Coach Mosley. We don't need to. Everybody know how great Coach Mosley is. But there's a lot of good things about the Magic. But they're not going to sneak up on teams. So I think it's a matter of not having those ruts that we kind of got a little bit last year at times. Hopefully they learn from those experiences and have gotten better. I think Joe Ingles, missing him, I don't think people realize how important he was to the squad. That is a little concerning for me because I think he was a key piece to that second unit and how successful that second unit was. Someone's going to have to pick that up, right? Whether it is, AB stepping up, who I have a lot of faith in. We never really saw Jet play last year, had a great summer league. Tristan da Silva was my dude this year. I can't remember was the last time the Magic picked the guy that I wanted. So Tristan da Silva, I'm very happy about that. I'm especially excited for Cole Anthony. I don't know why. I just think this is the year that he gives you 82 consistent games. Cole Anthony has been great for months, and then he just benches. I think this is the year that he gives you a full season of just consistent play. And when that happens, I think the team's special.
Well, of all the young guys in that core, Cole Anthony's probably, and I guess he's been there the longest, but he probably is the most to prove, right? Like he's had absolute brilliance at points where he's put the team on his back offensively. Yes. When he gets hot, he can't miss. And then you're right. He's had games where he's just totally been a non-factor.
Months, that like literally a whole month where he's just shooting 31%, 28% from three, averaging like 8 points, like months where he just falls off. But then you see these months where he's just like, oh my God, the guy's a sixth man of the year.
Yeah.
I just need that Cole Anthony for a whole season. It's not that he doesn't have the talent. I need it for the whole season.
Yeah.
If he gives us that, he's going to be great.
I'm hoping it works out for him because he's kind of been one of the main guys in like resetting the culture there a little bit. Like he really was proud to be in Orlando before it was cool to be proud to be in Orlando. Because you're right, this team is not going to creep up on anybody. And even signing a KCP, I think shows the steps that they're taking. Because you're right, like KCP is a winning player. Like the last few organizations he's been to, he's had a major impact. I mean, winning a title with the Lakers, winning a title in Denver. Like to me, Denver is pretty, he's going to be one of the players they missed the most. Like talk about the guys they missed last year. They got to fill that void now. And look, I'd have been fine if the Magic signed Clay because I think y'all needed shooting no matter what. But like, I just still think KCP gives you better minutes than Clay does at this point. And that's such a crazy statement to say, but like, he's not going to cost a ton of money. Like he just is like, I wanted the Sixers to go in on KCP if we didn't, obviously I thought we were going to land Paul George, like when that was kind of off the table for a little bit.
But there was a lot of argument, obviously, in a Magic Twitter world on Klay Thompson, right? There was a lot of civil war on that one. My take was that I didn't have a problem if that's where we went because of his championship pedigree.
Right.
To me, that was such a big need for the Magic team is, yes, we need to fill certain talent holes that we have, shooting being the most obvious for anybody who's ever watched us. Klay did that, right? Even at a bad year last year, he still shot the ball well above average, right? He gives you all that championship pedigree that we really needed. So for that, I was comfortable if that's the route we went. I really did prefer the KCP signing because he's a more complete player right now, right? So now I say that with a lot of it also has to do with scheme, right? Like Gary Harris is a great shooter, but Gary Harris takes what, 2 to 3 3-pointers a game? That's a scheme thing. That's not the talent lacking, right? He can shoot it. He wasn't getting the touches to shoot it, right? So is the same thing going to happen to KCP, right? Are the Magic now going to get KCP? We're all excited. Oh my God, 40+% from three. Great defender. Him and Suggs together in the backcourt. Awesome. Mid-season, he's averaging 7 points a game because he's only shooting threes from the corner 2 times a game. That's a scheme thing. Right. So I think Magic fans need to be prepared. Don't be focusing on the stats of KCP. Focus more on the impact of KCP. Because if we're winning, I could care less what his averages are. Right.
Yeah, I think the impact is key because so much of what KCP does, like, he's a great shooter, so that shows up. But like a lot of what he does, you're right, it is not the stuff that shows up on a stat sheet. It's getting to the right spot. It's playing good defense consistently.
It's
Um,
opening the floor for Paulo and Franz,
yeah,
right? Like, how much easier is it for someone like Franz now, who is an absolute maniac getting into the paint, when now you got 40% Suggs and 40% KCP on the sides, and Wendell Carter Jr. as your starting center who shoots 38 plus percent. Now that paint is wide open, right? And now you have two 6'10" players who are great passers, both of them, who are gonna find these open. Now we got to make teams pay,
yeah.
right?
In a way too, I just think like that's where, and you can't really quantify this one as much, but like I do think the loss to Cleveland in game 7 is just going to help them too with the mentality, like having that moment where the young team where, you're really close to it, but the lights just get a little too bright. Obviously a disaster class for Franz in game 7, but it's like you see him come right back. He plays in the Olympics. Again, I know a little recency bias, probably not the best end for Germany in the world, but the fact that he picked right back up. Paulo, I think everybody is still super high on. We talked about a little bit last week when we were projecting Team USA in 2028. Like, I think Paulo is almost a lock to be on that squad. Suggs is the key for me. Like, his breakout was so crucial last year. Like, he looked like the player the Magic drafted that we all were so high on and excited about when they drafted him. Like, if he can be almost like that Derek White type player that roll up in Boston, play that for the Magic. Like like you're right. That and him and KCP in the same backcourt, like good luck.
It's funny that you say Boston. I have been saying this for the last 18 months or so. To me, the Magic's blueprint is Boston. Like, you look at the way the roster is shaped up. Wendell Carter Jr. compares a lot to Al Horford. He's not Al Horford. Al Horford is at a whole different level than Wendell Carter Jr., so no comments on that. But they compare as players. You got two wing players with height that do it all. It's the same thing that Boston had. Now you have Drew, you have White, you have Suggs, you have KCP. Like, you have, again, defensive players, shooters, right? Their biggest difference there, Drew is a very good true point guard. I don't think Suggs is quite there yet, right? Yes, he played it in college, but I don't think he's necessarily what you would define as a true point guard like most people have been. He plays it. He's our starting point guard. But I do think there's a lot of similarities there. I thought the AB pick kind of showed that as well. Like, hey, we kind of want these big guys that can do it all. We don't want necessarily true positions. We just want a great big basketball players that can do everything. That is why the Magic are successful. You go up and down the roster, they all got height, they all got length, they all can do everything, right? There's not a lot of specialty players on the Magic roster. They can do a little bit of everything. They can all play defense. I think there's a lot of comparison to Boston, and we'll see in a couple of years if that's actually what ends up happening. But I do think that's been the approach of the team, is kind of following that footprint. We have a great defensive team, right? It shows. Right now.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about Isaac a little bit, and like he's been an icing on the cake type guy just with all the injuries. It was like, look, I mean, go back 4 or 5 years, I'm raving about Jonathan Isaac, and I still believe he's got DPOY potential. It's a little tougher now only because Wemby exists. Like, look, Wemby borderline could have won it this year, and I think it's a pretty good argument to have, honestly. And now it's like, yeah, he might have that award on lock for the next little bit here, but yeah, I mean, it makes all the difference in the world if he's able to play on a consistent basis. Because you're right, it's just like good luck scoring on that team.
He
And come
can
playoff time, that's what
literally.
you need. You want to slow because the game slows down.
You say this. People say this a lot, but very few times do they actually. Is it a true statement? Jonathan Isaac can literally defend any player on the court
Yeah,
at a high elite level. Whether you're a 6'2" point guard or a 7-foot center, Jonathan Isaac can legitly defend you at a high elite level. That is one heck of a weapon to have coming off the bench, especially in the playoffs. Why has the Magic front office been so patient with Jonathan Isaac? That's why. Because when you have that guy that you can bring him off the bench, throw him at Tatum, throw him at Embiid, throw him at Dame, throw him at Giannis, and he can actually impact it, what other team can do that? What other team has that player that they can just say, like, I need you to guard this guy now? He's getting too hot for me. There's not many teams that have that. So having that, that's a huge weapon for them. So Jonathan Isaac is a huge key to our success.
Yeah, they're going to project to be one of the best defensive teams in the league. I mean, realistically, I guess last Magic question is like, where do you? Boston is the clear one. I think we all agree there. I have New York at 2, and then it's kind of you get into like the Sixers and the Pacers and the Heat, maybe assuming health. I have the Magic right there. Like I think they could be as high as 3. Like I think they're right in that tier. I know everyone wants to put Philly ahead. Look, man, we don't need to go down that rabbit hole, but like I'm the wrong person to talk to. I'm beyond jaded at this point, even with all the new acquisitions that I do think make sense. Like I think this is the best roster by far of the Embiid era, assuming health. But I mean, I don't know. Like the Magic were 5 last year. They were as high at 2 at points. You know, it's hard for me again to put them over Boston and New York, but I mean, I probably got them anywhere between 3 and 5 at the worst.
I think Boston is clearly number 1.
Yeah.
Like you said, I don't know if I buy the Knicks just yet. I do like them. I think
You don't
unlike
believe in
years
the
past,
power of friendship and vibes?
I want to see it a little bit longer because I think this team again just gelled and got so hot. Is that sustainable for 82 games? Josh Hart was playing out of his stinking mind,
Unreal. I
right?
don't want to talk about it. He killed us. Killed us.
I mean, he was a maniac, like the reincarnation of Gerald Wallace on steroids. Like, my God, can he do that for a full season? Like, those are the things that when you look at it objectively, you're like, all right, some of these guys really punched above their weight class. Or is that their norm? That's the part that I don't know yet. I don't know if this is their norm or did they just get on a streak and just kind of rode that wave for a long time. So I'm not quite there with the Knicks. I do like the moves that Philly made. I thought they made some smart acquisitions. Um, they'll be dangerous in the playoffs with those 3 guys, Maxey, Paul George, and Embiid. They added a little more depth to them. So I think Philly's good. I don't know if I trust Milwaukee. Um, I don't.
I
I've
don't.
never been.
Yeah,
I've
I
never
don't
been
at all. So you're
a
right there
Doc
with
Rivers
me.
fans. So we've had these conversations offline
We know
for
what it is.
yes. So we don't have to. We can literally make a whole other podcast just about those conversations. But so yes, I think the Magic are right up there with everyone else. I think Indiana can do that. I just like the way that team is built. So yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot that can happen. Again, this is what I was saying earlier in this cast today, where you can be the 2nd seed, you can be the 8th seed in the East. And I think the gap is just small. It's a matter of, what teams get hot, what teams gel the best, what team is, healthy for the most part of the year. I think ultimately, more than anything, I think that's really going to drive the placing.
Yeah.
What teams remain healthy for them. And that sounds like such a cliche thing to say, but when the talent level is just not a huge difference, that's what it's going to be. Because I, besides the Celtics, which I really think are just above everybody at a tier, I think there's like 3 or 4 teams that are right there in tier 2.
Yeah, I mean, and realistically, as I'm looking at the standings from last year, the top 8 probably isn't going to change. Like it's Miami, Philly, Indy, Orlando, Cleveland, Milwaukee, New York, Boston. I don't really see anybody getting jumped. Like Chicago seems to be blowing it up. Maybe Atlanta gets there. I don't know. But then
I don't
Brooklyn,
see Atlanta.
Toronto, Charlotte,
I can't
Washington, Detroit.
stand Toronto. I can't stand Toronto.
No, I can't stand Toronto
But
either.
but they do have a nice little thing going on. And again, how quickly does that team build chemistry? Right? Quickly. Barnes, RJ Barrett, right? Like how quickly do they actually gel and get rolling? Because again, talent-wise, they could be an 8 seed. I just don't know if they'll get there. I don't think they've been together long enough to compete against some of these other teams that have been seasoned. Um, would I be totally surprised if at the end of the year they're in 8th place? No, because I think there's talent there. But again, a lot of I don't know what's Charlotte going to be. Is Charlotte going to be healthy? Is LaMelo going to play a full season?
Yeah, they all float around the play-in game for me, and that's like the best case scenarios where it's like you got the Chicago's, the Atlantas, the Torontos. Like you can talk yourself into varying degrees, but it's just like I think best case scenario they're around 9 and 10. Maybe they push 8, but if you're asking me right now who from that 8 I'm knocking out before health, just looking at the roster, I don't know that it really exists in the East. We're like in the West, you kind of got a few that get a little froggy there, and all of a sudden that conference gets a whole lot more interesting. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of the Drive and Dish NBA podcast. Appreciate you guys as always. Appreciate my guy, Andy Jordan, for filling in as always. I think this is like your second or third episode now, but either way, always enjoy talking hoops with you.
Third plus.
Yeah, we love that. Love it. Get a little Star Wars talk as well. Appreciate you guys nerding out with us at the beginning of the episode. Follow Andy on Twitter at Andy's Magic Minute. Again, watch the show on YouTube. Listen to the show wherever you get your podcasts. You got anything last minute you want to sneak in before we get out of here?
No, sir. I don't think. Oh, you know what? Caitlin Clark, Rookie of the Year. That's it. There's no debate. There's no debate on that. There's no debate on Aaron Judge being the MVP. Stop trying to push this narrative of debates. There is none. Judge MVP, Caitlin Clark Rookie of the Year. End of story.
Yeah, you heard it from the man. No lies detected. We'll see you next week.
All right, bye.